Everybody can move up if you like.
I have a question.
Down here.
I have a question. I always had a great respect for Reuben. I thought Reuben was one of the great men of our time. Yeah, Reuben. And I was surprised that he wouldn't come to your father's funeral. He wouldn't. There was and I couldn't believe I thought Reuben, he was shot because he was progressive.
You mean Rabin? You mean I think you're talking about Rabin, not Reuben.
Yeah, Reuben.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Rabin wasn't shot because he was progressive. Rabin was shot because of other reasons. But that's not important. The important thing is this. Rabin was one of the architects of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo peace, the so-called peace accords. Now, some of us are old enough to remember in 1993 there was these Oslo peace accords. And this was somehow an attempt, it seemed like it was an attempt to bring about a sincere peace. And I always like, there's a picture where they're about to sign the peace accords. And you've got Rabin and Arafat, you've got Bill Clinton, and they're flanked by the Egyptian President Mubarak and the Jordanian King Hussein. And when you look at that formation of people, you know nothing good can come out of it. We have two Arab leaders who are vicious dictators that nobody ever elected, that were bribed to make peace with Israel. You have Rabin, who is a war criminal, who should have been charged with war crimes, probably one of Israel's most notorious war criminals. And they are led by an American president, and no American can be president unless they are fully supportive of Israel. Nothing good could possibly come out of that group of people. And indeed, the Oslo so-called peace accords were a catastrophe for the Palestinians and a huge success for Israel. Because of the Oslo Accords, today, 20 years later, Israel has a stronger hold on the Palestinians, more control of the land, more control of the resources, and the lives of Palestinians are far, far worse than they've ever been. The Oslo Peace Accords, people think they failed. They didn't fail, they were a huge success. They were meant to destroy the lives of Palestinians, and Rabin was one of the architects of this, which is why he agreed. Rabin would never have agreed to anything that would have allowed the Palestinians any rights at all. He was shot for different reasons. People think he was shot because he was going to make peace. But that's a whole other issue. I don't want to get into that right now. No, it's a bit too long. It has to do with Israeli society, with tensions within Israeli society. He represented something, and the man who killed him represented a whole different part of society, and there was a clash between the two, and this was maybe the straw that broke the camel's back. But he wasn't killed because of peace. I think that's a myth that has to be dispelled, because peace was the farthest thing from his mind. And the reason in the book you mentioned that he didn't come to my father's to pay his respects, is because my father called him on it, and he said he didn't want peace. But that's a whole other issue.
Thank you, well said. I see you're wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, and I'm wondering if you think there's a big correlation between the Israeli government coming over here, I don't know how many years ago, I think it wasn't too many, to teach our police departments how to use the tactics they use against the Palestinians. And since then, I think we've seen a huge escalation of our police taking black lives on our streets. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, of course. I think I remember being in Atlanta, giving a talk in Atlanta, and some students came up to me with flyers because the Israeli police were there at that same on campus. I forget what campus that was on though. And they were giving courses to Atlanta Police Department on the same things that you mentioned. Of course there's a correlation. Oppressive colonialist regimes have a lot in common. America, it's interesting, here in America you hear a lot about the Jewish Holocaust. You hear very little about the African Holocaust, about the Holocaust that blacks had to endure here in America. We hear about the crimes of the Germans. We hear very little about the crimes of Americans against blacks and Native Americans. That's the nature of oppressive colonialist regimes, and Israel and America have a lot in common. So certainly there's a connection there, of course.
Okay, this is not a question, this is a comment. We do have a BDS group here in Sonoma County, and it's called the North Coast Coalition for Palestine. You can find it on the web, nccpal.org. And if I certainly encourage you to not buy Pastures of Eden feta cheese and whatever, and ahava. But if you want to go a little farther than that, you can look us up, nccpal.org.
Okay, I'm asking this question not to be disagreeable, but to have a real answer. And being Jewish, I have a lot of Jewish relatives who feel very passionate about Israel, and I feel that I pretty much agree with almost everything you said. And I feel that the Israelis should be the last people on earth to treat the Palestinians the way they have. And again, on the other hand, I know that they say people who've been abused often turn out to be abusers. And that's still no excuse. But the question I have is what you said about one man, one vote, and all that. And I know that a lot of Jews are afraid that in that kind of situation they would be outnumbered, and once again they'd be in the position of being a minority and having all these terrible things happen. And so I'm asking you this question partly from the point of view of those relatives that I have out there who are think that if you give an inch to the Palestinians, you've turned everything over to the entire Arab world and to every anti-Semite on the planet, and it will be the end of Jews. So what's the answer? What do you want to say?
Well, first of all, when you choose to live in an Arab country in the middle of the Arab world, there are going to be a lot of Arabs around. So if Israeli Jews don't like living around Arabs, they can go somewhere else. That's number one. And in fact, I know somebody who will probably be willing to buy them the ticket. Number one, they're already not the majority anywhere. Jews are not the majority even in Israel, in Palestine. The majority are Palestinians. Out of 12 million people who live there in the entire country, 12 million people, about 6.2 million are Palestinians. Israeli Jews are the minority already. If you're worried about intolerance, then you have to make sure that tolerance is the law of the land. You don't impose intolerance on somebody else. Jews are a minority in America. Jews are a minority in South America. Jews are a minority in Europe. Jews are a minority everywhere. Jews are a minority in Israel. What guarantees us our safety, what guarantees our rights is not whether we're a majority or a minority. It guarantees us if we guarantee that there's tolerance all around. Unless we have a real democracy, unless we have a real culture of tolerance, then there's not going to be tolerance for anyone. So, again, I'll say that if they're afraid of Arabs, they shouldn't live in an Arab country. Palestine is an Arab country. It's got an Arab history. It has Arab monuments. It is more Arab than it's ever been Jewish or anything else. So if anybody doesn't like living among Arabs or living in the Arab world, they can get on a plane and go somewhere else. The truth is, however, that Jewish communities in the Arab world always fared very well. In fact, they never wanted to leave. Why the Jewish communities from Arab countries ended up coming to Israel is a whole other story. But it wasn't because they were suffering in the Arab world. In Iraq, we know the Jewish community lasted for maybe almost 2,000 years. In Yemen, in Syria, in North Africa, they thrived. In fact, that's where they went when the Christians were killing them. They went to the Arab world for safety. So this idea that somehow if we're around Arabs it's dangerous for Israelis, it's dangerous for Jews, is part of the Zionist lie and it's part of the Zionist myth. It has absolutely no bearing on history and no bearing on reality. And like I said, the Arabs and the Palestinians did not present a threat to Israelis ever. It is the Palestinian resistance that people don't like, because they want the Palestinians to suffer and die and shut up while they do it. And darn these Palestinians, they won't die and they won't shut up. And I'll say one more thing about this. You know, people talk about the rockets. That's another thing people bring up. The rockets. The rockets. What are they going to do about the rockets? Well, number one, anybody that has a problem with the rockets, the famous Hamas rockets, which by the way never killed anyone, if anybody has a problem with the Palestinian rockets coming out of Gaza, I suggest they do what I do. They go to Gaza. They can go through a tunnel like I had to, or they can go legally. Stay with my friend Yusuf at the Nusrat refugee camp, and let me see how many days it takes before they start shooting rockets themselves. I want to see any American Jew go, or any American at all, go to Gaza, live in the refugee camps, and I want to see how many days it will take before they join the Palestinian resistance. Not months, days, if that. So they need to sit down and shut up. If they don't like the resistance, then the oppression has to end, the occupation has to end. And during the last attack, I'll have to say this as well, during the last Israeli attack last summer on Gaza, hundreds of young Palestinians who attempted to fight this horrifying Israeli war machine fought Israel heroically and died. Hundreds of them died. Now, if they were not Palestinians, they would be heralded as heroes around the world, as freedom fighters. But we know Palestinians are not allowed to be heroes, they're only allowed to be victims. That's the reality here. But if anybody does not like the rockets, I point my finger at the Israeli government. They can open the gates, they can allow the people in Gaza to go home, they can use the $10 million a year to rebuild Gaza and to take care of the people that they killed and they injured. So that is the answer to that.
You have a question? Oh, okay.
Well, we're looking at the same reality. The reality we see is the whole world is rising in struggle. Everywhere you see turbulence and upheaval. And a couple of things I notice, Bernie Sanders and others are silent by complicity, complicit by silence. So I can't support any of those candidates. And the other thing I notice is that we need to get beyond social relations based on exploitation. So I say we need to get rid of the capitalist imperialist system which is driving all this, and I wonder if we agree on that point.
Absolutely, brother. I'm with you 100%. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Miko. Thank you.